The wrench slipped from my greasy fingers as I heard my wife's voice drift through the thin wall separating our garage from the kitchen. Cedric Fallon, 42 years old, tech consultant by day, grease monkey by night, crouched beneath the hood of my 1969 Camaro SS like some suburban caveman hiding from civilization. Oh, Simon, you should have seen his face when I told him to focus on his own inadequacies instead of my phone. Cleo's laugh carried that particular brand of cruelty reserved for people she considered beneath her. He actually looked hurt. Can you imagine? I froze, engine oil dripping onto the concrete floor of our pristine suburban garage. 20 years of marriage, and I'd never heard that tone directed at me before, not even during our worst fights. The divorce will be simple, she continued, her voice growing more animated. He's so trusting, so pathetic. I've already moved half our assets to accounts he doesn't know about. My law firm has connections everywhere. By the time I'm finished, he'll be lucky to keep that ridiculous car he's always tinkering with. Simon Parker, St. Simon, as the local newspaper called him, director of 3 nonprofit organizations, frequent guest on morning talk shows, the kind of man who looked good in a suit while discussing helping disadvantaged children. My wife's college boyfriend back in our lives 6 months ago when his latest charity drive needed legal consultation. You're brilliant, Cleo. Simon's voice came through the speaker, smooth as expensive whiskey. He'll never see it coming. The restraining order will be the final nail in the coffin. Who's going to believe a bitter husband over a respected attorney and a humanitarian? I set down my tools with deliberate precision, each clank echoing in the garage like a countdown timer. My hands weren't shaking yet, but they would be soon. Not from fear, from anticipation. The best part, Cleo's voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper, is that he thinks I actually care about saving our marriage. He bought me flowers yesterday, Jeremy. Flowers. Like some teenager trying to apologize for missing curfew. Jeremy? Who the hell was Jeremy? I thought his name was Simon. I told you, call me Simon when we're planning, the voice corrected. Jeremy is too risky if someone overhears. Ah, Simon Jeremy Parker. The saint had multiple personalities for different audiences. How perfectly fitting. I wiped my hands on an old rag, considering my options. 20 years ago, I might have stormed into that kitchen, demanded explanations, made threats I couldn't back up. 20 years ago, I was young and stupid and believed that love conquered all. Now I knew better. Now I understood that the best revenge wasn't served hot or cold. It was served with surgical precision, timed perfectly, and delivered with the kind of methodical patience that separated the amateurs from the professionals. When do you want to move forward? Simon asked. Next week, Cleo replied. I've already drafted the papers, irreconcilable differences, emotional abuse, financial irresponsibility. The judge will eat it up, especially when I tell him about Cedric's drinking problem. My drinking problem? I had maybe 3 beers a week, usually while working on the car, but I suppose that detail would get lost in translation. What about your daughter? Max will understand eventually. She's 19, not stupid. She knows her father's been distant lately, always hiding in that garage instead of spending time with family. It won't be hard to convince her that I'm the victim here. I closed my eyes, feeling something cold and calculating settle into the space where my heart used to live. Max was my daughter too, but apparently that relationship was just another casualty in Cleo's master plan. The conversation continued for another 10 minutes, covering logistics, timelines, and contingency plans. They'd thought of everything, almost everything. They hadn't counted on me listening. When Cleo finally hung up, I heard her heels clicking across the kitchen tile, heading upstairs to our bedroom. Our bedroom, where she'd probably spend the next hour researching divorce attorneys and calculating alimony payments. I pulled out my phone and opened a new note. At the top, I typed, Project Saintly Fallout, Phase 1. Then I started making a list. The first item was simple, list the house. The second, freeze joint accounts. The third, download banking records. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. By the time I reached item 15, my hands had stopped shaking entirely. I felt calm, focused, almost serene. This was just another project, like debugging code or rebuilding an engine. Identify the problem, analyze the components, develop a solution, execute with precision. I'd spent 2 decades building a life with Cleo. She wanted to tear it down? Fine. But she was about to learn that demolition was a 2-player game, and I'd been studying the blueprints a lot longer than she had. The garage door opener hummed as I raised it, letting in the cool evening air. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked, and Mrs. Henderson's television flickered through her living room window. Normal suburban sounds for a normal suburban evening. Nothing normal about what I was planning. I climbed into the Camaro, turned the key, and smiled as the engine roared to life. Tomorrow, Cleo would wake up to a very different world than the one she'd gone to sleep in. But tonight, I had work to do. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat in my home office, the one Cleo never entered because it smelled like motor oil and contained nothing she considered valuable, and methodically began dismantling our life together. The house went online first. I used a realtor website that promised immediate listing, uploaded photos I'd taken 6 months ago when we discussed refinancing, and set the price 15% below market value for a quick sale. By morning, we'd have showings scheduled. Next came the finances. 20 years of marriage meant 20 years of joint accounts, shared credit cards, and intermingled assets. Cleo thought she was clever, moving money to accounts I didn't know about. What she didn't realize was that I'd been handling our taxes for 2 decades. I knew every account, every investment, every hidden asset she thought she'd cleverly concealed. I didn't drain anything. That would be illegal. And despite what Cleo apparently thought, I wasn't stupid. Instead, I froze everything. Joint accounts required both signatures for major withdrawals. I simply removed my authorization for anything over $50. Her credit cards, canceled. Our shared investment accounts, frozen pending review of account security. The automatic payments for her gym membership, her subscription boxes, her monthly spa treatments, all suspended due to irregular account activity. By 3 a.m, I'd created a paper trail that would make a forensic accountant weep with joy. Every transaction, every transfer, every suspicious movement of funds over the past year, all neatly organized in a folder labeled Evidence. But the real masterpiece was the recording. I'd learned a long time ago that our kitchen had terrible acoustics. Sound carried through the walls, especially phone conversations. What I hadn't mentioned to Cleo was that I'd installed a security system last year after our neighbor's house was burglarized. The system included audio recording in common areas. Everything was perfectly legal. It was my house, my security system, and my wife had been discussing criminal conspiracy in a space where she had no reasonable expectation of privacy. The recording was crystal clear. At 4 a.m, I copied everything to 3 separate drives, stored them in different locations, and uploaded backups to a cloud service Cleo didn't know existed. Then I took a shower, made coffee, and waited. She came downstairs at 7:30, already dressed for work in one of her power suits. Cleo had always been beautiful, the kind of woman who turned heads in restaurants and made other men wonder what she was doing with someone like me. This morning, she looked particularly radiant. "You're up early," she said, not quite meeting my eyes as she poured coffee into her travel mug. "Couldn't sleep," I replied truthfully. "Had some things on my mind." She nodded absently, checking her phone. "I'll be late tonight. Big case coming up. Lots of preparation." "With Simon?" The question hung in the air between us. Cleo's hand paused halfway to her purse, and for just a moment I saw something flicker across her face. Guilt, fear, calculation? "Simon Parker, yes, the nonprofit consultation. I've mentioned it before." "Right, the saint." "Don't be sarcastic, Cedric. He's doing important work." "I'm sure he is." She kissed my cheek, the same perfunctory gesture she'd been giving me for months, and headed for the garage. I heard her car start, then the sound of the automatic door opening. 30 seconds later, she was back. "Cedric." Her voice carried a note of panic I'd never heard before. "There's a realtor sign in our front yard." I walked to the kitchen window and looked out, feigning surprise. "Huh? That's weird. Maybe they put it in the wrong yard? It has our address on it." "Really? That's strange." I pulled out my phone, pretending to check something. "Oh, wait. I listed it last night." The silence stretched between us like a taut wire. Cleo's face went through several expressions: confusion, disbelief, and finally cold fury. "You did what?" "I listed our house for sale. We're getting divorced, right? Might as well get ahead of the asset division." "We never discussed divorce." "No, you're right. You discussed it. With Simon. I just listened." Her face went pale, then flushed red. "I don't know what you think you heard. I heard everything, Cleo. Every word, every plan, every lie." She opened her mouth, closed it, then opened it again. For the first time in 20 years, my articulate, quick-thinking attorney wife was speechless. "You were listening to my private conversations?" "In my own kitchen? Yeah, I was." "That's illegal." "No, actually it's not. But conspiracy to commit fraud is." I walked past her to the coffee pot, refilled my mug, and leaned against the counter. Cleo stood frozen in the doorway, her carefully constructed world crumbling around her like a house of cards in a hurricane. "Here's what's going to happen," I said calmly. "You're going to call Simon and tell him the game's over. You're going to withdraw any divorce papers you filed. And you're going to start being very, very nice to me." "Or what?" I smiled, and apparently something in that expression made her take a step backward. "Or I release the recording to your law firm, the State Bar Association, and every local news outlet that's ever done a puff piece on St. Simon's charitable work. You wouldn't. Try me." She stared at me for a long moment, and I could practically see the gears turning in her head. Cleo was nothing if not calculating. She was weighing her options, looking for leverage, searching for a way to regain control of the situation. "You can't prove anything," she said finally. "Can't I?" I pulled out my phone and played 30 seconds of the recording. Her own voice filled the kitchen, crystal clear and utterly damning. "The divorce will be simple. He's so trusting, so pathetic." I stopped the playback. "Want to hear more? I've got 47 minutes of material." Cleo's composure cracked completely. Her hands were shaking as she set down her coffee mug, and when she looked at me, I saw something I'd never seen before in her eyes. Fear. "What do you want?" she whispered. "I want you to remember something," I said, walking toward her until we were standing inches apart. "You told me to focus on my flaws instead of your phone. Well, I've been focusing. And you know what I discovered? My biggest flaw was trusting you." I brushed past her and headed for the garage. "Cedric, wait. I'm going to work," I called over my shoulder. "When I get home tonight, I expect St. Simon to be permanently out of our lives. If he's not, the recording goes public." I climbed into my truck and backed out of the driveway, leaving Cleo standing in the garage doorway looking like she'd been struck by lightning. Phase 1 was complete. Time for Phase 2. Simon Jeremy Parker lived in Harbor Heights, the kind of luxury high-rise that catered to successful professionals who wanted to live downtown but couldn't be bothered with the inconvenience of actual city life. 37 floors of glass and steel, with a concierge who wore white gloves and a parking garage that required a key card for access. I'd been watching the building for 3 days, learning the rhythms of St. Simon's carefully orchestrated life. He left every morning at 7:15, returned for lunch twice a week, and came home between 6 and 8 in the evening, depending on his schedule of charitable appearances. Today was Thursday. According to the nonprofit's website, Simon had a board meeting at 10, a lunch with potential donors at noon, and a speaking engagement at the Rotary Club at 7. Plenty of time for what I had planned. The parking garage was my entry point. I'd learned long ago that security systems were only as strong as the people who operated them, and most people were lazy. The keycard reader had a backup manual override, and the security guard spent most of his time watching videos on his phone instead of monitoring the cameras. I waited until the guard left for his coffee break, then slipped into the garage through the pedestrian entrance when another resident opened it. Simple social engineering. People held doors for middle-aged men in business casual clothing without thinking twice. Simon's car was exactly what I'd expected. A pristine silver BMW with vanity plates reading saintly. Even his license plate was a branding exercise. I didn't damage anything. That would be criminal mischief, and I wasn't interested in giving Cleo ammunition for her inevitable counterattack. Instead, I did something much more effective. I deflated his tires. Not slashed, not punctured, just deflated using a simple valve tool that left no evidence of tampering. Then I placed a note under his windshield wiper. "You're not even worth a full set. CF." The security camera in that section of the garage had been conveniently blocked by someone's carelessly parked SUV. Amazing how often that happened. I was back in my truck and 3 blocks away before Simon's board meeting even started. The real show began at lunch. Riverside Cafe was Cleo's favorite restaurant for business meetings. Upscale enough to impress clients, but not so expensive that it raised eyebrows on expense reports. She'd taken me there for our anniversary 3 years running until I'd finally convinced her to try somewhere else. I arrived early and took a table with a clear view of the entrance, ordered coffee, and waited. Simon arrived first, looking every inch the successful humanitarian in his tailored suit and perfectly styled hair. He chose a corner table, probably thinking it would provide privacy for whatever they planned to discuss. Cleo arrived 10 minutes later, and even from across the restaurant, I could see the tension in her shoulders. She sat down across from Simon, and immediately their conversation became intense and animated. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but I didn't need to. Their body language told the whole story. Simon was gesturing dismissively, shaking his head. Cleo was leaning forward, her voice growing more urgent. At one point, she reached across the table to grab his hand, but he pulled away. 20 minutes later, they were both standing. Simon threw money on the table and walked out without looking back. Cleo sat alone for another 5 minutes, staring at her untouched salad before gathering her things and leaving through the rear exit. I followed Simon to the parking garage. He was standing next to his BMW, phone pressed to his ear when I approached. His face was flushed with anger and frustration, and he was gesturing wildly despite being alone. "Told you this was a mistake from the beginning," he was saying. "I never agreed to anything permanent. This was supposed to be simple." He noticed me walking toward him and lowered his phone. "Can I help you?" His voice carried that particular brand of condescension reserved for people he considered beneath his notice. "Simon Parker." "Yes." "Cedric Fallon, Cleo's husband." The color drained from his face. He glanced around the parking garage, probably looking for security cameras or witnesses, then straightened his shoulders and tried to project confidence. "I don't think we have anything to discuss." "Oh, but we do." I stopped about 3 feet away, close enough to make him uncomfortable, but not close enough to be accused of threatening behavior. "See, I know all about your little arrangement with my wife." "I don't know what you're talking about." "Sure you do. The phone calls, the planning sessions, the asset transfers, I've got it all recorded." His eyes darted to his phone, then back to my face. "That's impossible." "Is it? Want to hear a sample?" I pulled out my phone and started the recording. Simon's own voice filled the parking garage. "The restraining order will be the final nail in the coffin. Who's going to believe a bitter husband over a respected attorney and a humanitarian?" I stopped the playback. Simon was staring at me like I'd just grown a second head. "How did you?" "That's not important. What's important is what happens next." "Are you threatening me?" "Not at all. I'm offering you a choice." I stepped closer, and Simon instinctively backed against his car. "You can walk away from this situation right now, cut all contact with my wife, and pretend none of this ever happened. Or I can release this recording to every news outlet in the city and watch your saintly reputation go up in smoke." "You can't prove anything." "Can't I?" I gestured toward his deflated tires. "You're already having a bad day, Simon. Don't make it worse." He followed my gaze to his BMW, and his face went from pale to red. "You did that? Prove it." We stared at each other for a long moment. Simon was trying to project authority, but I could see the fear in his eyes. He was a man accustomed to controlling situations through charm and manipulation, but those tools were useless against someone who already knew exactly who he was. "What do you want?" he asked finally. "I want you to disappear. No more phone calls, no more meetings, no more consultations. Find another lawyer for your nonprofit work." "And if I don't?" I smiled, the same expression that had frightened Cleo 3 days ago. "Then you'll find out exactly how creative I can be when someone threatens my family." Simon's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and I saw Cleo's name on the screen. He looked at me, then at the phone, then back at me. "Answer it," I said. He hesitated, then swiped to accept the call. "Cleo?" I could hear her voice through the speaker, high-pitched and frantic. "Simon, we need to talk. Something's happened. Cedric knows about us." Simon looked at me, and I nodded encouragingly. "I can't help you," he said into the phone. "What do you mean you can't help me? We had a plan." "The plan's changed. I'm out." "You can't be out. I've already started the paperwork, moved the money." Simon ended the call and looked at me. "There, it's done." "Good choice." I turned to walk away, then paused. "Oh, and Simon, if I were you, I'd get those tires fixed before your Rotary Club speech. It would be embarrassing to show up late." I left him standing in the parking garage, phone buzzing incessantly with calls from Cleo that he was no longer answering. Phase 2 was complete, but as I drove home, I realized something that should have worried me but didn't. I was enjoying this. The house was dark when I got home, but Cleo's car was in the garage. I found her in the living room, sitting in the dark with a glass of wine that looked like it wasn't her first. "He won't take my calls," she said without turning around. "Can't imagine why." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You think you're so clever, don't you? Recording private conversations, threatening people, playing these juvenile games." "Juvenile?" I sat down across from her. "Cleo, you were planning to frame me for emotional abuse, steal half our assets, and destroy my relationship with our daughter. But I'm the one playing games? You don't understand the bigger picture. Then explain it to me." She took a long sip of wine, studying me over the rim of the glass. "Simon was never the real problem, Cedric. He was just convenient." "Meaning what?" "Meaning this was never about him. This was about settling a score." I felt something cold settle in my stomach. "What score?" Instead of answering, she pulled out her phone and made a call. "It's me," she said when someone answered. "Yes, he knows about Simon. No, that doesn't change anything. Actually, it makes things easier. She hung up and smiled at me, and for the first time since this whole thing started, I felt genuinely unsettled. Who was that? Someone you know very well, someone who's been waiting a long time for this moment. Before I could respond, the front door opened and Renee Dalrymple walked in like she owned the place. Renee, Cleo's best friend and law partner. Renee, who'd been to our house for dinner hundreds of times over the years. Renee, who'd been my daughter's godmother and my wife's confidant and apparently the architect of my destruction. "Hello, Cedric," she said, settling into the chair next to Cleo. "Enjoying your little detective game?" "Renee." I kept my voice steady, but my mind was racing. I should have known. Should you? Most people don't expect betrayal from someone they've known for 15 years. Most people don't deserve it. Her expression hardened. Don't they? Tell me, Cedric, do you remember why I left Morrison Tech? Morrison Tech, my old company where I'd worked as a senior systems analyst before starting my consulting business, where Renee had worked in the legal department before joining Cleo's firm. You got a better offer, I said slowly. I got fired. Because of you. The memory came flooding back. 5 years ago, Morrison Tech had been investigating irregularities in their legal department. Missing files, altered contracts, clients being overcharged for services. As the senior IT person, I'd been asked to analyze the computer systems and identify the source of the problems. I'd found evidence pointing to someone in the legal department, someone who'd been using their access to manipulate billing records and skim money from client accounts. Someone named Renee Dalrymple. You were embezzling, I said. I was surviving. Do you know what they paid legal assistants at Morrison? Barely enough to cover rent, let alone student loans and medical bills for my mother's cancer treatment. So you stole. So I took what I needed from people who had more than enough. Her voice was rising now, years of resentment spilling out. But you couldn't let it go, could you? You had to be the hero, the honest employee who turned in the bad guy. I had to do my job. Your job destroyed my life. I lost my career, my reputation, my savings fighting the criminal charges. I had to start over from nothing while you got promoted for your integrity and dedication to company values. Cleo was watching this exchange with obvious satisfaction. Renee's been planning this for years, Cedric, waiting for the right opportunity. And I provided it? You made it easy, Renee said. A marriage that was already struggling, a wife who felt neglected and unappreciated, a daughter who barely knew her father because he spent all his time hiding in the garage. So you convinced Cleo to have an affair. I convinced Cleo to take control of her life. The affair was just a means to an end. And Simon? Simon is an idiot who thinks with his ego instead of his brain. He was never supposed to be anything more than evidence of your wife's infidelity. I looked back and forth between them, pieces of the puzzle falling into place. This was never about divorce, was it? This was about destroying me completely. Now you're getting it, Cleo said. The divorce was just the beginning. After that, there would have been complaints to your clients about unprofessional behavior, rumors about drinking problems, questions about your mental stability. We were going to systematically dismantle everything you'd built, Renee added. Your business, your reputation, your relationships. By the time we were finished, you would have been unemployable. And our daughter? Max would have learned the truth about her father, that he was an obsessive, controlling man who drove his family away through his own selfish behavior. I sat back in my chair, genuinely impressed despite myself. That's actually brilliant. They exchanged glances, clearly not expecting that response. The only problem, I continued, is that you told me about it. It doesn't matter now, Renee said. You can't prove any of this. It's your word against ours, and we're both respected attorneys. Are you? I pulled out my phone and showed them the screen. It was recording. 23 minutes and counting, I said. Everything you just told me, including the confession about embezzlement at Morrison Tech, is now permanently preserved. Renee lunged for my phone, but I was faster. I stood up and backed toward the kitchen, keeping the device out of reach. You can't use that, Cleo shouted. We didn't consent to being recorded. In my own living room? Actually, I can. Same legal principle that let me record your kitchen conversation. No one will believe it, Renee said, but her voice lacked conviction. Won't they? Renee Dalrymple, former Morrison Tech employee, admits to embezzling money and orchestrating an elaborate revenge scheme against the man who exposed her crimes. I think people will find that very believable. I backed into the kitchen, still recording, as both women followed me. What do you want? Cleo asked. What I've always wanted, the truth. You have the truth. I have part of it, but I want all of it. Every detail, every plan, every person involved. and I want it on record. And if we refuse? I smiled, feeling that same cold satisfaction that had been growing inside me for days. Then tomorrow morning, I'm going to have a very interesting conversation with the district attorney about reopening the Morrison Tech case. Apparently, they never recovered all the stolen money. Renee's face went white. The statute of limitations doesn't apply to ongoing criminal enterprises, and this revenge scheme of yours, that makes it ongoing. They stared at me, and I could see them both calculating, trying to find a way out. But there wasn't one. I had them exactly where I wanted them. Start talking, I said, and don't leave anything out. They talked for 2 hours. By the time they were finished, I had a complete confession detailing 5 years of planning, manipulation, and conspiracy. Renee had orchestrated everything from her initial approach to Cleo through the recruitment of Simon as an unwitting accomplice. She'd helped Cleo hide assets, draft fraudulent legal documents, and plan my systematic destruction. But more importantly, I had names. Max knew? I asked when Renee mentioned my daughter's involvement. Max suspected you were having problems, Cleo said defensively. I may have guided her interpretation of events. You turned our daughter against me. I prepared her for the inevitable. By lying to her. By protecting her from disappointment. I stopped the recording and saved multiple copies to different devices. Both women watched me work, their faces reflecting the growing realization that they'd just handed me everything I needed to destroy them both. What happens now? Renee asked. Now you're going to help me fix this. Fix what? Everything. You're going to call Max and tell her the truth about your manipulation. You're going to contact every client you've involved in this scheme and withdraw any false statements. You're going to return every penny you helped Cleo hide. And if we refuse, then I release everything, the recordings, the financial records, the evidence of your embezzlement. All of it goes to the police, the state bar, and every news outlet in the city. Cleo and Renee exchanged looks. They were trapped, and they knew it. You're bluffing, Renee said finally. You won't destroy your own wife's career. Won't I? Cleo stopped being my wife the moment she decided to betray me. Now she's just another criminal who got caught. I could claim coercion, Cleo said. Say you forced me to confess under duress. You could try. But then I'd have to release the original recording of your conversation with Simon, the one where you're clearly acting of your own free will. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at our quiet suburban street, normal houses, normal families, normal lives continuing while mine imploded in spectacular fashion. You know what the funny thing is? I said without turning around. I actually loved you, Cleo. For 20 years, I thought we were building something together. I thought we were partners. We were partners. No, we weren't. Partners don't plot each other's destruction. Partners don't lie and steal and manipulate. I turned to face them both. Partners trust each other. Trust is a luxury, Renee said. Some of us can't afford it. Maybe, but revenge is expensive too. And you're about to find out exactly how much it costs. My phone buzzed. A text message from an unknown number. Dad, Mom said you wanted to talk to me. I'm coming home. Max. I looked at Cleo. You called her. She deserves to know what's happening. She deserves to know the truth. All of it. 20 minutes later, my daughter walked through the front door looking like she'd rather be anywhere else in the world. Max had always been beautiful, like her mother, but where Cleo's beauty was sharp and calculating, Max's was warm and genuine. At least, it had been before this whole mess started. Hi, Dad. She barely looked at me, focusing instead on Cleo and Renee. Mom said there was some kind of family emergency. Sit down, sweetheart, I said gently. We need to talk. If this is about the divorce, I already know. Mom explained everything. Did she? What exactly did she explain? Max glanced at Cleo, who nodded encouragingly. She told me about your drinking problem, and how you've been emotionally distant, and how you threatened her when she tried to get help. I see. And you believe that? Why wouldn't I? I've seen how you've been acting lately. Always angry, always suspicious, hiding in the garage instead of spending time with family. I pulled out my phone. Max, I want you to listen to something, and then I want you to decide for yourself what kind of man your father really is. Cedric, don't, Cleo warned. She deserves the truth. I played the original recording of Cleo's conversation with Simon. All of it. The mockery, the manipulation, the casual cruelty of a woman discussing the destruction of her husband like it was a business transaction. Max's face went through several expressions as she listened. Confusion, disbelief, hurt, and finally, anger. When the recording ended, she looked at her mother with something I'd never seen before in her eyes. Disgust. Mom? Honey, you have to understand, that recording is taken out of context. What context makes it okay to call Dad pathetic? What context makes it okay to plot against your own husband? Cleo reached for Max's hand, but our daughter pulled away. And you, Max turned to Renee. You're supposed to be my godmother. You've been in my life since I was 4 years old. Max, sweetie. Just don't. Max stood up and walked over to where I was sitting. For the first time in months, she looked directly at me. Dad, I'm sorry. I believed them. I actually believed that you were the problem. It's not your fault, sweetheart. They're very good at manipulation. What are you going to do? I looked at Cleo and Renee, both of whom were watching this family reunion with obvious dismay. I'm going to give them a choice, I said. They can make this right voluntarily, or I can make it right for them. What does that mean? It means your mother and Renee are going to fix everything they've broken. They're going to return the money they stole, withdraw the false statements they've made, and publicly admit what they've done. And if they don't? I smiled, and this time there was no warmth in it at all. Then they're going to learn why you should never underestimate someone you've betrayed. Cleo stood up abruptly. I'm not admitting to anything. You can't prove intent, and without intent, there's no crime. Can't I? Renee just confessed to embezzlement and conspiracy. You just confessed to fraud and asset concealment. Both crimes carry significant penalties. No prosecutor will take this case based on illegally obtained recordings. Maybe not, but the State Bar Association will be very interested in these recordings, and your law firm, and your clients. I pulled up a contact list on my phone. Let's see. Channel 7 News, Channel 12, The Tribune, The Herald. I bet they'd all love an exclusive story about a prominent attorney who conspired to frame her own husband. You wouldn't dare. Try me. We stared at each other across the living room, 20 years of marriage reduced to a standoff between enemies. Cleo's mask of composure was finally slipping, revealing the calculating predator underneath. What do you want? She asked finally. I want my life back. I want my daughter's respect back. I want everyone who believed your lies to know the truth. That's impossible. Is it? Tomorrow morning, you're going to call a press conference. You're going to admit that you made false statements about me during our marriage difficulties. You're going to publicly apologize and withdraw any legal actions you've taken. I'll be disbarred. Probably. My career will be over. Should have thought of that before you decided to destroy mine. Renee stood up. This is insane. You're talking about mutually assured destruction. No, I'm talking about justice. You both made choices. Now you get to live with the consequences? And what about you? Cleo asked. What happens to you when all this comes out? I looked around the living room, at the house we'd shared for 15 years, at the life we'd built together and then systematically destroyed. I'll survive, I said. I always do. This isn't over, Renee said as she headed for the door. Yes, I replied calmly. It is. After they left, Max and I sat in silence for a long time. Dad? She said finally. Yeah? Are you really going to destroy Mom's career? I considered the question carefully. Your mother destroyed our family for revenge. She turned you against me, stole our money, and tried to frame me for crimes I didn't commit. What do you think I should do? I think, Max said slowly, that actions have consequences. They do. And I think Mom forgot that. She did. Max leaned against my shoulder, something she hadn't done in years. I'm proud of you, Dad, for fighting back.